This is America, where ICE is under intense scrutiny for killing 2 people across 2 different states in recent weeks. And there are allegations of abuse inside their detention centers, allegations they strongly deny. President Trump marching forward with mass deportations. He campaigned on going after hardened criminals, but enforcement has looked very different. I'll have more on that coming up, but first, to Alex Marquardt in our D.C. studio.
Thank you, Eva. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE, is at the forefront of Donald Trump's crackdown on undocumented migrants in this country. The agency has been backed by billions of dollars in additional funding and a recruitment drive that has added 12,000 officers in just the past year. But after a spate of deadly violence, it is also facing new levels of criticism and scrutiny, with accusations that its agents are not being properly vetted or trained after shootings where those who were killed were not the targets of operations.
This is a perfect storm that unfortunately has led to the killing of people across the country. We've invited ICE and they refuse. We've invited DHS and they refuse. We invited the FBI and they refuse. Our federal authorities have refused to come forward. And so we are here to hold them accountable.
That was after a recent shooting in Houston, Texas. There have been 23 ICE shootings across 11 states, as well as the capital, Washington, D.C., since Donald Trump came into office of January last year. Minnesota, Maine, Texas, and Illinois have all seen fatal ICE shootings. Most recently, Joan Sebastian Guerrero in Maine was killed on Monday, July 13th. Lorenzo Salgado Araujo was killed in Houston, Texas on July 7th during a traffic stop. Renee Good and Alex Peretti were both anti-ICE protesters. They were killed in January in Minneapolis. Silverio Villegas Gonzalez was killed in Illinois in September of last year. Ruben Ray Martinez was killed on South Padre Island in Texas in March of 2025. In all but one of these shootings, the victims were in a vehicle pulled over by ICE in a traffic stop. Those shootings have led to calls for widespread review of the federal agency ICE and an examination of hiring practices. Our chief U.S. correspondent Alan Fisher reports.
Donald Trump likes ICE and the job they're doing in getting undocumented migrants out of America.
They shouldn't be here. I'm getting them out.
350,000 people in the first part of 2026, according to official figures, fueled by a multi-billion-dollar budget passed by Congress to supersize ICE.
Leave me alone!
Attention law enforcement.
It brought an unprecedented hiring drive.
Join ICE and help us catch the worst of the worst.
220,000 people applied for the posts, attracted by some of the benefits. A $50,000 signing-on fee. No college education required. It used to be you had to be between 21 and 40 to work for ICE. That simply became anyone over the age of 18.
But you can't be any geek off the street. You gotta be handy with the steel, if you know what I mean, earn your keep.
But the speed in putting many of them on the street has led to questions about training, temperament and tactics. 2 recent high-profile fatal shootings haven't helped. One in Maine and one in Texas, both during attempted traffic stops. The latest shootings brought new calls for more of these to be deployed, body cameras. The idea that one member of every team would have one, and the idea has a big supporter in Donald Trump's border czar.
I want the American people to see what that ICE officer sees when he takes action. And I think it's going to help ICE with the false media that's out there about it.
Immigration was a huge driver for Trump's 2024 election win.
I say deport all illegals. We need to. We have to. We have absolutely no choice.
What happened to taking the drug dealers down? Not innocent people. That's not what you said, President Trump.
But a new poll reveals melting support for ICE. 48% of Americans want it abolished. 56% thinks it uses too much force. 54% of Americans disapprove of the president's handling of immigration, making a key issue a possible political liability, with midterm elections racing closer. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Washington.
For more, I want to bring in Jessica Vaughn, who is the Director of Policy Studies for the Center for Immigration Studies, and Deborah Fleischaker, who is the former Acting Chief of Staff at ICE. Thank you both for joining me today. I want to start with the most recent news, these two shootings in Houston, Texas, and in Maine. And the border czar, Tom Homan, he did a flurry of press over the weekend. Here's a little bit more of what he had to say about the vetting of some of the ICE agents. Take a listen.
There are several things under review, right? The training is under review, and I know that the acting ICE director now, David Ventrellis, has added additional training because I'm one that supports you can't ever have too much training. You know, when I was ICE director several years ago, I evaluated training. It's something law enforcement does all the time. So I wouldn't say now that we're evaluating some additional training that mistakes were made. We'll see. It's all being reviewed. We'll see where it lies.
So in the case of the Maine shooting, the ICE officer was found to have had a long history of violence and instability. And we heard Tom Homan there saying that if these allegations were true, that the officer, David Bruyette, shouldn't have gotten past vetting. So, Deborah, how did he get through?
Well, I think the Trump administration has reduced the requirements. I mean, I think that they've in a rush to bring on 10,000 additional agents, they have reduced the requirements to get in. They have moved more quickly, and they have reduced training, which they're now, in the wake of mistakes, looking to potentially reverse. I think that it's the clear sort of outcome of a rush for numbers, right? When the goal is arrests and deportations, regardless of how you get them, you're going to make mistakes. And what we see here is the unfortunate consequence of those mistakes. I think vetting is a really easy way to make sure that you're bringing the right people, that you're entrusting the right people with a badge and a gun. I mean, that is a really solemn responsibility that the government has, and it has to get that right. And unfortunately, here it feels like it seems like it didn't.
When you look at this one individual, and I get that this is one case in Maine, but there are widespread concerns. But this officer, he had struggled with mental instability since he was a child, attacking, threatening his exes, looking for fights, allegations of racism. Jessica, how widespread do you think what Deborah is describing is in terms of undertrained officers, especially when the administration is asking them to do so much in a very intense environment?
Well, obviously, we'll find out in the investigation into this incident, but I think this is clearly an anomaly. This is not routine when cases like this happen. We have to remember, though, that first of all, this is happening in the wake of a 4-year border crisis and an unprecedented period of illegal immigration and criminal actors taking advantage of our open immigration system for years. And ICE had to respond to this crisis and we have to be careful. Anytime you have to hire a lot of officers for law enforcement in a short period of time, there's the risk that some hires may have been inappropriate, but that's why it's important to take a step back, take a look at this incident, see where corrections can be made so that ICE can keep up with this mission. But we also have to remember, I cannot ever remember a time when there has been so much risk for ICE officers and agents operating on the street, with so much resistance, with people being riled up by rhetoric from political leaders who are opposed to the current policies, and an unprecedented number of attacks on not only ICE officers, but also threats to their family. So they're operating in a very toxic environment and a risky environment, and we need to look at how best to keep those officers safe also. And of course, in Houston and in Maine, it appears that in these situations, the officers believed that they were in danger. And, again, we'll have to see what the investigation says, but that's contributing to this very difficult environment that they're working in.
But obviously, there are two sides to that. I mean, do you see no responsibility from them in terms of fostering some of that environment, going into these American cities, perhaps without any kind of an identification, with masks on, picking Americans up off the streets as well? It does seem that there is some responsibility there.
Well, remember, ICE would much rather make its highest priority arrests, which are criminals and people who are a threat to public safety, they'd much rather do that in the jails. But in some of these places, there are sanctuary policies that prevent local law enforcement agencies from allowing ICE to take people directly from local custody. Now, ICE has to operate much more frequently on the streets, looking for people who've been released by sanctuary policies or who have been in the country a long time and are ignoring removal orders. So they are out in the community much more than they have been in the past and much more than they would like to be, frankly. They don't want to be chasing down vehicles. They'd much rather take someone who's in a jail. But that's simply not possible in the many sanctuary jurisdictions.
Deb, how do you see that tension between the federal government and the localities?
I think we need to go back for 1 minute. I don't think we can say, look at how hard their job is, and not go to the point that you initially made, which is that they've created the conditions that people have responded to. So I do think we need to focus on the fact that, sure, ICE does have a hard job. ICE has always had a hard job. ICE has a harder job now because of the indiscriminate enforcement that we've been witnessing all around the country. As it relates to cities, sanctuary cities, or otherwise, look, I don't know of a single place that doesn't provide information that ICE has access to. Different states and jurisdictions and localities have different rules about when ICE can go into the prisons and jails and when they can't, but everyone shares information with ICE. ICE is aware of everyone who is undocumented in prisons and jails around the country. ICE can get that information. ICE has access to it. I will say, I agree with Jessica here on the point that it is easier for ICE to be picking people up from prisons and jails. I wish they would focus on that. I wish they would focus on getting the bad guys, as they said they were going to, instead of doing what we're all witnessing, what we've all seen, and what the majority of the country has recoiled from.
Of course, this has become an extremely polarizing and extremely political issue. Nearly 200 Democrats in Congress have written a letter expressing concern over ICE's tactics. They said, quote, both of these incidents, that's in Texas and in Maine, have created enormous fear and outrage in the community and raised serious concerns about the safety of community members, regardless of immigration status. And quote, far too many Americans and non-citizens alike are dead as a result of DHS's reckless actions, and wrote, there must be accountability and independent investigations. Jessica, are there any reforms that you see that need to take place here, or just a tightening up of some of these operations? Because so much of it, so many of them have gotten out of hand, and it's all across the country.
Well, I would like ICE to take a look at its practices for when they are operating at large, you know, particularly around vehicle stops. Clearly, they need to take a look at that and use of force. I think hot pursuit policies always have to be carefully evaluated. And, you know, I'm against illegal immigration as much as anybody, but I think, you know, we have to be careful in hot pursuit situations so that people aren't hurt. You know, these are immigration violations. You can get people another time. You don't need to put people at risk. But I think there's great public support for ICE's mission and for enforcement to continue at a very vigorous pace, particularly enforcement against that fraction of people who are here illegally who are committing other crimes. But again, I would like to see some of the sanctuary jurisdictions, and actually there are some that don't share any information with ICE, and ICE does not know where every illegal alien who's been arrested is, because sometimes they have not had encounters with DHS before. And that's you know, when you consider there were 9 million gotaways who entered under the Biden administration, that's an important consideration. But so, I really do think that the problem of sanctuaries is a big one that ICE needs to address, and that, frankly, state and local leaders need to take a look at their policies also to see what they can do to try to defuse this situation and help ICE out.
In terms of the popularity of ICE, I mean, these immigration tactics have become quite unpopular. And obviously, this was a subject that Donald Trump was a big part of his victory back in 2024. There's a 55% disapproval. That's according to Reuters. ICE is viewed unfavorably, 61 to 36%. That's according to Marquette polling. Deborah, has enforcement gone further than the public wants?
I think undoubtedly. I think all of the public polling shows that, right? I think that Donald Trump and his administration promised that they were going to go after the bad guys. And I think people expected that that's what they were going to see. Robust and vigorous efforts to get the people who had committed serious crimes in this country. What we're seeing is not that. And they have been completely unwilling to put in place guardrails, even the ones that Jessica says that she supports, right? Like, I think that's wonderful. I'm so glad you support those things. But I'll give you another example. Look at body-worn cameras. Under the Biden administration, while I was at ICE, we put in place a body-worn camera policy, and we started sending body-worn cameras around the country so that officers would have them on their person. It was a pilot program. We were getting them out as we had the money. Well, ICE has been given huge amounts of money. They have not prioritized that. They pulled the program back at the beginning of the Trump administration. But the Boston field office, which covers Maine, which is where one of those shootings happened, they were provided body-worn cameras. Why weren't they wearing them? Body-worn cameras provide us with the ability to know what happened and conduct appropriate oversight and ensure that problems, if they happen, we can intervene and try to make sure they don't happen again.
And that's something that Tom Homan said this weekend should be prevalent across the country. Why hasn't that happened, Jessica?
I don't know. I do know that some of the money for this was only recently made available by Congress because of the government shutdown, or the shutdown of DHS and ICE. But ICE leadership, Tom Homan, supports the use of body cams.
But clearly
they're not going to make
happening.
everything perfect, but they are helpful. I think most law enforcement officers support them as well. So, I think going forward, we're going to see a lot more of that, but don't expect it to solve all these problems for sure.
Another troubling aspect that we've seen is actually in the detention centers. Once the people have been detained, we have seen rising deaths in detention facilities. Human Rights Watch and the ACLU have accused ICE of serious abuse at Camp East Montana. That's in El Paso, Texas. They are alleging that the ICE agency, these are allegations rather, that ICE strongly denies. Al Jazeera's Eva McKent has this story.
In cities across the U.S., furious protesters have taken to the streets against ICE. Now, a new report shifting attention to what advocates say happens after immigrants enter federal custody. Human Rights Watch and the American Civil Liberties Union accuse ICE of widespread abuse inside Camp East Montana in El Paso, Texas, at Fort Bliss. That's a former Japanese-American internment camp. It's the country's largest immigration detention center. The nearly 100-page report relies on interviews with dozens of current and former detainees, attorneys, family members, and advocates. Researchers allege detainees endured physical abuse, substandard medical care, prolonged isolation, and barriers to communicating with attorneys. One detainee described the facility saying, "This place is a graveyard of living people." Another told investigators, "The guards beat us. When one person speaks up for themselves, they take it out on all of us. It doesn't matter if you haven't done anything wrong. They beat you just for insisting on getting your rights, food or medicine, when you don't get it." The report comes as the Trump administration continues to defend its broader immigration strategy, pointing to low levels of border crossings and maintaining ICE officers are operating in a dangerous environment.
I've done this since 1984. My concern is I think a lot of the rhetoric that you see every day, especially in sanctuary cities and at these protests that you resist. Members of Congress saying ICE isn't a real law enforcement agency.
Democrats say the allegations reinforce concerns they've raised for months about oversight of these facilities.
They're getting substandard food. They're not getting the medical that they need. This place needs to be shut down.
As greater enforcement of ICE grows louder, this new report is only expected to intensify the national debate over immigration enforcement and if the federal government is doing enough to protect the rights of people in its custody. ICE rejects the report's conclusions. In a statement to Al Jazeera, the agency says no detainees are being beaten or abused. The agency says those in custody have access to food, medical care, legal counsel, and communication with family members. Since Camp East Montana opened last year, 3 detainees have died in detention. Eva McKend, Al Jazeera, Washington.
So some 22 people who died in ICE custody this year. There were 33 last year, the most in 2 decades. Deborah, is there any accountability for this?
Well, unfortunately, there's really limited accountability. I mean, the Trump administration has killed the oversight agencies that would normally have investigated incidents in detention facilities. The Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and the Office of the Immigration Detention Ombudsman were both internal DHS offices that conducted oversight to try and make sure that conditions were appropriate. And they are now largely killed. I mean, in everything but name. And I guess OIDO, the detention ombudsman, is actually killed, has been killed at this point. I'll say this, like, detention is difficult to do well. And therefore it has to be done very carefully and very thoughtfully. I've been responsible for running immigration detention as the chief of staff of ICE. I've been responsible for overseeing it in the Office for Civil Rights. What we see is the natural byproduct of a rush to move people into detention because of the quotas, because of the numbers. If the goal is only numbers, then you are going to harm people. And it's what we see both on the street with the enforcement and in the detention facilities with deaths in custody.
Is this being scaled up too quickly, Jessica, to be done safely? I mean, you have some 60,000 people, more than 60,000 in custody by ICE, and they're looking to build detention units in up to 14 new locations.
No, I don't think it's being done too quickly. I think there's a great need for more immigration detention space to be able to address the huge problem.
But can you do that well at the same time as you do it?
I think so. ICE has decades of experience with, and it's ICE and its predecessor agency have a lot of experience with this, with the standards. And of course, every death needs to be investigated. But it is possible to do this at a greater scale. And also, though, I would say that this shows the importance of getting people to comply voluntarily with immigration laws. And if you are here illegally, don't take the risk of being potentially subject to detention and removal. If you know you don't have a path to lawful status, then it's best if people go home on their own. You know, that's the most humane solution ultimately. You know, the goal is not to arrest and remove everyone who's here illegally. The goal is to get people to voluntarily comply with the law.
But the guy who was killed in Maine was here legally. He had a social security card. He was clearly arrested because or at least the officer attempted to detain him because there was some kind of suspicion. But Deborah, following that, DHS said that they would stop traffic stops because they were leading to these deaths. The president quickly reversed that. Should that have stayed in place?
Of course it should have stayed in place. I mean, Secretary Mullen, who was in charge of the department, agreed that they should stop traffic stops. President Trump and Stephen Miller decided that, again, the numbers, the enforcement numbers, the quotas were more important than the safety of the people who they were enforcing against. That's not the way that we should be doing this. There is a role for immigration enforcement. I believe that there should be some immigration enforcement, but it has to be done carefully, and there has to be the respect for both the lives and health and safety of the officers and for the people they enforce against. And what we're doing now, what we see now, isn't that.
Jessica, I want to give you a chance to respond to a question that I asked Deborah just a moment ago, because the figures do show that the way that the administration has approached this in general and ICE in particular are unpopular on balance. Do you agree with that? I mean, do you contest those numbers in terms of the overall feeling in the country?
Well, I think that the country is polarized. There are many people who are very supportive of what is happening in terms of immigration enforcement and want to see more of it, and for it not to be restricted to only people who've committed serious crimes, but also to people who do not go home on their own, even though they know that they're here illegally and they've been ordered removed and they haven't complied with it. And I think there are some people who simply don't agree and who think that we should legalize this population. But, you know, it really doesn't mean much to have immigration laws if we're not going to enforce them. And it's not fair to legal immigrants to allow people to get away with ignoring immigration laws. So I do think overall the public is in favor of immigration enforcement. They don't particularly want to see it happening on their TV screen every night,
right?
But they want to have an immigration system with integrity.
Well, certainly when you listen to Tom Homan over the weekend, he acknowledges that there are issues. To what extent he will actually address those and the agencies will, obviously remains to be seen. Jessica Vaughn, Deborah Fleischaker, thank you both for joining me on this very difficult and important subject. Appreciate it. I'm Alex Marquardt, heading back to Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha.
Thanks, Alex. We'll see you tomorrow for another edition of This is America. That's 1830 GMT or 2:30 p.m. Eastern if you're here in the United States. See you then.